By the spring of 1942, the air war in the Pacific was brutally one-sided. The United States Navy was still reeling from early losses, its pilots learning painful lessons against an enemy that seemed untouchable in the sky. Japanese naval aviation, hardened by years of combat over China, dominated the air with confidence and ruthless efficiency. American dive bomber crews knew this reality well. Their aircraft were designed for a single purpose: to dive steeply onto enemy ships, release bombs with precision, and escape before anti-aircraft fire could tear them apart. Air-to-air combat was never part of the plan. If enemy fighters appeared, doctrine dictated one simple truth: run, if you could. On the 8th of May 1942, that doctrine collapsed. Flying patrol off the coast of Papua New Guinea, an American formation of dive bombers scanned the skies for Japanese torpedo aircraft. The threat they expected was slow, predictable, and manageable. Instead, what emerged from the clouds was a nightmare. Fast, agile fighters descending with lethal intent. At the center of the unfolding disaster was Stanley Vejtasa. He was not an ace, not a fighter pilot, and not equipped for what came next. He flew a SBD-3 Dauntless, a sturdy but sluggish aircraft that sacrificed speed and agility for stability and firepower in a dive. Against fighters, its strengths became liabilities. The enemy aircraft were Mitsubishi, A6M Zero, the terror of the Pacific skies. Faster, lighter, and armed with devastating 20mm cannons, the Zero had shredded Allied aircraft across the region. Its pilots relied on speed, tight turns, and aggressive attack angles to overwhelm opponents before they could react. The first pass was catastrophic. Zero slashed into the American formation from behind, exploiting blind spots with clinical precision. Aircraft erupted into flames within seconds. Crews barely had time to register what was happening before comrades vanished in smoke and fire. The formation disintegrated, each surviving aircraft suddenly alone in a hostile sky. Vejtasa pushed his Dauntless forward, instinctively trying to create distance. But distance was an illusion. The Zero could close it at will. He knew the numbers, the performance charts, the hard facts taught in training manuals. His aircraft was slower. It turned wider. It climbed worse. Yet retreat offered no safety. As the Japanese fighters regrouped for another attack, the situation became clear. This was no longer about completing a mission or protecting a formation. It was about survival measured in seconds. Every decision now carried lethal consequences. One mistake, one predictable maneuver, and the sky would claim another American crew. Outnumbered, outmatched, and isolated, Vejtasa faced a truth few pilots ever confront so clearly. The battle had already begun, and there would be no escape. The sky behind the Dauntless erupted into chaos. As the first Japanese fighters tore through the remnants of the American formation, Stanley Vejtasa found himself utterly alone. No friendly aircraft, no cover. Only the empty sky ahead and death closing from behind at terrifying speed. Instinct said to flee. Training said to evade. But neither would work. The SBD-3 Dauntless simply could not outrun a Zero. It could not climb away. And if it tried to turn like a fighter, it would be carved apart in seconds. Vejtasa knew that every conventional option led to the same ending. So he did something no instructor would recommend. Instead of running, he turned straight toward the enemy. The first Mitsubishi A6M Zero rushed head-on, its cannons flashing. At the last possible moment, Vejtasa fired early, sending a desperate burst of .50 caliber rounds into empty air. It was a gamble born of necessity, not confidence. And somehow, it worked. The Zero roared past, missing by inches. Its speed, normally its greatest strength, carried it straight through the firing zone and out of position. For a brief, astonishing moment, the impossible had happened. The Dauntless was still flying. There was no time to reflect. More Zeros were coming. This time, Vejtasa went even further against instinct. He deployed the air brakes, slowing his aircraft to a near crawl. In air combat, speed meant life. Slowing down meant death unless the enemy relied too heavily on speed to fight. As another Zero charged in, Vejtasa waited. Too long. Almost fatally long. When the Japanese pilot opened fire, Vejtasa yanked the aircraft into a brutal turn. The G-forces crushed both men into their seats, pushing the limits of human endurance. Blood drained from their heads. Vision narrowed. The Dauntless groaned under the strain, but it held. The Zero overshot again. This time, the tables turned. As the Japanese fighters struggled to reposition, the Dauntless's rear gunner unleashed a torrent of fire. tracer rounds stitched across the enemy's fuselage. Black smoke poured from the Zero as it limped away, mortally wounded. Against every rule of air combat, the first enemy was out of the fight. Yet victory brought no relief. Two more Zeros pressed the attack, coordinating their movements, striking from above and behind. Vejtasa's mind raced, calculating angles, speed, and timing under unbearable pressure. He forced the Dauntless into repeated high-G maneuvers, each one stealing more strength from his body. The sky became a spinning blur of metal and motion. And still, impossibly, the Dauntless refused to die. What began as survival was becoming something else, a slow, violent shift in momentum. The Japanese pilots, accustomed to swift kills, now faced an opponent who would not break, would not flee, and would not behave as expected. In the heart of that chaos, one truth emerged. This battle was no longer about machines. It was about who could adapt faster under fire. The battle should have ended by now. By every measurable standard, the American dive bomber should have been burning wreckage, spiraling toward the sea. Instead, the sky remained violently alive and dangerously crowded. Two Mitsubishi, A6M Zeros fighters adjusted their approach. The reckless, high-speed passes had failed. Now came patience, coordination, pressure from multiple angles. This was how Zero pilots were trained to finish stubborn prey. Inside the cockpit, Stanley Winfield Vejtasa felt the cost of survival mounting. Each evasive maneuver demanded more from his body and from the SBD-3 Dauntless than it was ever designed to give. The aircraft shuddered under repeated high-G turns. Muscles burned. Vision blurred at the edges. Behind him, the rear gunner was losing the fight against physics. The G-forces were relentless. Thrown violently from side to side, unable to stabilize his weapon, the gunner's strength faded. Moments later, he slumped forward unconscious. The Dauntless was now flying half-blind, stripped of its last defensive bite. The Japanese pilots sensed it. 1-0 fell in close behind, abandoning high-speed slashing attacks in favor of a chilling new tactic matching the bomber's speed. Staying glued to its tail, waiting, another Zero circled above, probing for an opening that would end the fight. For the first time, fear returned in full. Then came the moment that changed everything. The trailing Zero closed in, dangerously close, yet did not fire. Seconds stretched. The distance shrank. Something was wrong. And then the realization struck with icy clarity. The Japanese pilot was attempting to ram. Ramming was not madness, it was doctrine of desperation. When ammunition ran dry or position was lost, collision became a weapon of last resort. It was an act that turned victory into mutual destruction. Vejtasa shoved the throttle forward, trying to escape. It was useless. The Zero was faster and immediately caught up, opening fire at point-blank range. Bullets tore into the Dauntless's wings and tail. The aircraft lurched violently. With his gunners still unconscious, Vejtasa had no return fire. Only one option remained, force the enemy to overshoot. He slammed the air brakes again and threw the aircraft into a desperate scissoring maneuver. The Zero anticipated it, cutting throttle, refusing to fly past. The two aircraft locked together in a deadly aerial dance, crossing paths again and again. So close that Vejtasa could see the enemy pilot's cockpit. Then metal met metal. The impact ripped the control stick from Vejtasa's hands. Debris spun away into the sky. For a heartbeat, he was certain it was over. That gravity would claim him next. But the Dauntless still answered. Against all logic, it was still flyable. Below, the Zero spiraled away, trailing smoke, mortally damaged. The sky fell silent. No engines screamed. No gunfire followed. The enemy was gone. What remained was wreckage, exhaustion, and disbelief. This was not a clean victory. It was survival at the very edge of human and mechanical limits. A moment where skill, endurance, and sheer refusal to surrender outweighed speed, firepower, and numbers. The battle ended not with triumph, but with the quiet realization of how close death had come. From a strategic standpoint, this encounter was never meant to be remembered. It was a single aircraft, a single crew, and a fleeting clash in the vastness of the Pacific. Yet moments like this quietly shaped how wars were fought and how they were later understood. In early 1942, American air doctrine still leaned heavily on rigid assumptions. Aircraft were designed for specific roles. Dive bombers bombed. Fighters fought. Survival depended on formation discipline and predefined tactics. What happened above Papua New Guinea shattered that simplicity. The Japanese Zero represented a philosophy of air combat built on performance dominance. Speed, climb rate, and maneuverability were expected to solve every problem. Against most opponents, they did. But this engagement exposed a critical weakness. Over-reliance on technical superiority could breed predictability. The American response, though unplanned, revealed something different. What kept Stanley Winfield Vejtasa alive was not superior hardware or formal doctrine. It was adaptation under pressure. He exploited overshoot. He weaponized deceleration. He turned the perceived weaknesses of the Dauntless, its stability, its ability to endure extreme G-forces, into tools of survival. None of this appeared in manuals. All of it mattered. For American military thinkers, these early encounters contributed to a slow but vital shift. Training began to emphasize flexibility. Pilots were taught to think beyond their aircraft's intended role. Survival was no longer framed as obedience to doctrine, but as the ability to read an enemy and break expectations. Globally, the implications were just as significant. Encounters like this foreshadowed the gradual erosion of Japanese air superiority, not through a single decisive battle, but through accumulated lessons. The Zero remained dangerous, but it was no longer invincible. Its vulnerabilities, fragility, limited pilot protection, and dependence on momentum were being discovered, one fight at a time. This was not a turning point that made headlines. It did not alter the course of the war overnight, but it represented something more enduring. It showed that wars are not only shaped by grand strategies and massive fleets, they are also shaped by isolated moments by individuals who survive long enough to teach the next lesson. And in war, lessons learned in blood tend to echo far beyond the battlefield. When the sky finally fell silent, there was no celebration, no formation to return to, no enemy left to fight, only a battered aircraft limping through the clouds and a pilot trying to process the fact that he was still alive. For Stanley Winfield Vejtasa, the encounter ended not with triumph, but with exhaustion and disbelief. Against every expectation, a dive bomber had survived repeated attacks by elite Japanese fighters, not because it was superior, but because it was pushed beyond what anyone believed possible. The U.S. Navy would later recognize the action with a second Navy Cross. On paper, it was another decoration in a growing war. In reality, it marked something deeper. It acknowledged that survival itself, when achieved through courage, discipline, and judgment under fire, was a form of victory. The legacy of this battle does not lie in the number of aircraft destroyed. It lies in what it revealed about war in the air. Technology matters, training matters, doctrine matters, but none of them are decisive on their own. What ultimately kept Vejtasa alive was the refusal to surrender to inevitability. He broke assumptions his own and his enemies. He accepted pain, risk, and uncertainty in exchange for one more second, then another. In doing so, he exposed a truth that would echo throughout the Pacific War. Adaptability could neutralize superiority. For the Japanese, encounters like this hinted at the limits of their early dominance. For the Americans, they reinforced a growing belief that survival and victory would belong to those who learned faster, endured longer, and questioned doctrine when reality demanded it. Today, the wreckage of that fight is gone. The sky above Papua New Guinea is quiet again, but the lesson remains. Wars are not only decided by grand strategies or industrial might, they are decided in moments, seconds, where individuals must choose how to act when no rule applies and no help is coming. And sometimes, history turns not on who had the better machine, but on who refused to accept defeat when everything said it was inevitable. Call to action. What do you believe mattered most in this battle? Aircraft design, pilot skill, or the willingness to adapt under pressure? Share your thoughts in the comments. If stories like this matter to you, consider subscribing as we continue to explore the moments where history was decided in the margins of survival.